Hey guys, in this video we are going to work on Google one-tap login. So if we click on this login with Google button, it will show up. If we click away, it will disappear. And now let's try to log in with our account. We are now logged in with our Google account. First, let's solve this little tiny problem. Focus in our login model and in our register model moved to our passwords. That's because I forgot in the password field to delete the autofocus. So let's delete it now. And let's save and check. Now it is working correctly. When it is login, the focus on email, and when it is registered, the focus on the name field. Now let's get rid of these notifications. Let's go to the navbar and delete this user object. We don't need it anymore. And this photo URL as well. And let's go to login and update this reference from name to email. Now let's start building our login tab. Let's go to console.developers and create a new project. Call it whatever you want. I'm gonna call it travel place. Let's go to credentials. We need to configure the consent first. Of course, it will be external. And we are going to call it "you are welcome." This is our email. We are going to fill only the necessary fields, the required one. Let's save and continue. And here, save and continue. Save and continue as well. And let's go back to our dashboard and create our credentials. We are going to use auth client ID. This is web application. We will just make it short here. And here, according to Google documentation, if it is HTTP, not HTTPS, and it is localhost, you need to add it twice. One, the right link, and the other one is the localhost. Let's repeat this here in the redirect URIs. And now let's copy our client ID. It's good practice to put it in environment variable, because in real project you are going to work on two environments, one for development and testing, and the other one is the production. Let's create our environment variable file. And let's call it React _app _Google _client ID. Let's add as well our server URL, because we are going to need it when we send the requests to our server. Now let's restart our environment. Let's go now to our Google One tab and start working on our functionality. We are going to use disabled, it is a state, to control the state of our button when it is disabled or enabled. And on a click, we are going to create a function, handle Google login. Now let's create our state, disabled and set disabled. The default value is false. That means it is enabled. And let's work on our function, handle Google login. First thing is to disable our button, not to click it twice or more. And let's try and catch. We need here the client library of Google, GSI library. Let's include that in our index.html. Here before our div. Let's initialize Google account. window.google.account.id.initialize. And let's pass the arguments inside an object. Client ID is our client ID. We are going to bring it from our environment variable. And this is the callback function. When there is a response from Google, we will handle this response with our function handle response. Let's create this function. It will receive the response. And for now, let's console log this response to see how it looks. Let's prompt now the pop-up window. It's actually not a pop-up window, it is just a prompt. And let's pass it a function. We will receive the notification. And let's check this notification. So this case notification is not displayed. That means the prompt is not working for any reason. For example, if you clicked on the X, the Google think that it is annoying the user, so it will not shown for the user anymore for 2 hours. But I'm gonna show you by the end of this video how to get rid of that, so you can enable it again. So in this case, if it is not working, we will throw new error. Try to clear the cookies because they put it in a cookie. And in case it is skipped, that means the user clicked outside that prompt. This will close the prompt and we can enable our button again. Notification is dismissed. That means we received a response from Google, even the response with the authenticated user, or there's a problem or something. So in this case, we will set the disable to be false to enable our button again. Let's import our dispatch so we can show the error to the user. Type is update alert, and the payload will be an object. Open true, severity is error, and the message will be the error message. And let's console the log as well. Let's save and check. Let's try to log in. There's a problem with our functionality. Let's check. That means, yeah, it is. We need to refresh our page so we can upload the Google library. It is not uploaded yet. Let's inspect, check here. Yeah, the library is not here. Let's refresh the page. Now it is here. And let's log in again. It's now working. If we click here, it is not enabling our button. There is an error. Let's check what it is. Well, this is triggering the error. It's a function, we should invoke it by 2 parentheses. Now let's save and check again. Now it is working. When we click outside, the button is enabled again. Let's get rid of these error messages and try to log in with this account to see what we receive in the response. This is the response from Google. Let's check. It is an object. Inside it, our client ID and the credential. Credential is the token we are going to decode to get the information of the user from that token. But we need to install a package. Let's install it. gwt decode. This will decode the Google token. Now let's use it here. Let's import it first. And let's extract our token from the response. It is response.credential. And let's decode the token using gwt decode function and pass it to our token. Let's console log the decoded token to see what is the information we received. Let's clear this and try to log in again. Let's see our console. This is the object. Yeah, we have our client ID, the email of the user, if it is verified, the expiration date. and then information of the user, name, picture, and the ID, which is the sub. So let's extract the information we need from this object. So let's extract the sub, and we are going to call it ID, the email, name, and the picture we are going to call it photo URL. Now let's update our user with this object. Type update user, and the payload will be ID, email, name, and the photo URL. And let's add the token as well, and Google to recognize that this token is provided by Google. And here let's close our login. Let's save and check. Let's log in with one of these accounts, and now here's our account. We are logged in, and we can see the icons and the drop menu. This is only client side. We need to verify this token in a safe environment, that is in our server. We need to communicate with Google to verify the signature, if it is available and valid, and it is not expired or modified or compromised. Do never trust the client side with any information. So let's first initialize our server by npm init. This will create the package.json. We need to add type to be module, because we need to use import instead of require. And we are going to install some packages. We need to install express.env Google Auth library, and for development let's install node MERN as a development dependency. And here let's add start, update this to be node MERN index.js. Now let's create the env, and let's add our client URL. And let's add the port. Let's make it for 5000. And let's add our client ID. Let's copy it again and paste it here. Now let's work on our structure. Let's create some folders. We need one for models, and one for controllers, third one for routes, and let's create our index file and start initializing our server. Let's import Express. And the .env. First, let's initialize our environment variables by.env.config so we can access them. And now Let's create a variable port. We'll bring the port in our environment variables, otherwise we will use the 5000. Now let's initialize our express. Here we are going to use a middleware to allow access from cross-site, because we have two links, one in our server and the other one for our client. It is not the same link. We need to inject our headers with these configurations. First one is access control allow origin, and we are going to pass our client URL. Let's copy it twice. One for methods and the other one for headers. We are going to use get, post, put, patch and delete. And in the headers we are going to allow x requested with, content type, and authorization. Now let's pass the execution to our next middleware by invoking next. Here let's add a middleware express.json, because we are going to use JSON in communication between client and the server, and let's limit it with 10 MB. As you want, you can put here the number you want, but don't make it too big or leave it blank, because the hackers can overload your server and they can do the denial of service attack. And here the main page, if any user access the main link, we'll just give him a welcoming message. And in case the client access a link that it is not available, we will just respond with this not found status. Success is false, and the message we will include not found. We are going to use this style for response in all our responses, so we can easily manage them. Now let's create a function to make our server listen to requests. We made it async because we need to communicate with our MongoDB using this function before we listen to the requests. Connecting with the MongoDB, we are going to work on it in our next video. Let's make our server listen on our port, and we will console log the message server is listening on port and the port number. And in case of error, let's console log that error. Now let's invoke our function so we can start our server. Our server is listening on port 5000. Let's go to controllers and create room controller. This is just for testing. We are going to simulate that the user adds a room. We will just respond with the status 201. That means it's created. And we will include success is true and result we will add ID title to be test room or something. This is just we needed to test our authorization, if we can allow the user to access this resource or not. That depends on the token of the user, if it is valid or not valid. Let's create a router for this resource. Let's call it room router. Let's import a router from Express. And let's import our controller we've just created. Let's initialize router and assign it to room router. And in case there is a post request on this router or this route, we will just call our controller create room. Now let's go to our index file and add a middleware here. It will be on the route /room, and we are going to pass our router, room router. So any route on this URL or this link will be received by this room router. Now let's try to access this resource or try to add a room. It is just testing. We are going to add that on our profile item menu. Let's add a function here on a click. Test authorization. Just testing. We are going to change this later. It's a async function because we are going to use a wait when we fetch our request. The URL is our server URL inside our environment variable plus /room. This is the requested URL. Let's try and catch. And let's try to fetch that URL. We're going to use fetch here. The method is post. Headers. We are going to add content type. This is application JSON. And let's add the authorization to include our token. Bearer token, bearer space, and let's import our current user from the state. And let's add here current user.token to pass our token to the server. And let's extract the object from the response by await response.json. And let's console the data to check that everything is working. And in case of error, we will dispatch our alert. Type is update alert. And the payload will be open true. Severity error. And message error message. And let's console the error as well. Let's check our data object. If it is not success, we will throw new error. And we are going to pass the data message. These we received them from the server in our response. Let's fix this error. Let's send the request by clicking on our profile. Let's check our console, what we received. We received an object and it is the successful one. We didn't check anything in our server, so the request passed and we received the successful message and the object of the room. Even if we modified or compromised our token, we will still receive a successful response because we didn't verify the token of the user if it is valid or if it is manipulated or modified or compromised by any means. But in our next step, we are going to verify that token if it is valid or not. So let's change the token. Let's add, for example, T to that token. That means it is not valid. We played with the token. Let's clear this and let's request again. There is no check, simply we received a successful. We're still receiving this. So now let's go to our server and implement our verification for the token that the user is authorized to access this resource. Let's create a middleware and let's call it auth.js. Let's import our auth to client from Google library. And let's initialize this class by calling a new auth to client and pass it our client ID that we saved in our environment variable. This is according to Google documentation how to verify the token. And let's create our function. It is a sync function to receive the request, response, and the next. And let's export it as default. This function will intercept any request that we need the user to be authorized to access that resource and validate the token. If it is valid, it will pass to the next function to access that resource. Otherwise, it will never pass to that function. It will respond to the user directly by rejection the request and passing that it is unauthorized. Let's extract our token from the request and let's split our token. If you can see, when we send it, we add bearer space. So we will split this and we will get the second part, and that is our token. Let's get the second part. Now let's check if it is Google token, because we are going to create our own tokens using GWT. Google token is more than 1000 characters, so we will check if the length is more than 1000. In this case, we are going to communicate with Google. Otherwise, we are going to decode our token using GWT and our secret salt. In this video, we are just going to deal with Google tokens, and in the next video, we are going to deal with our custom tokens. So let's continue by calling a client.verify ID token, and let's pass our token to ID token, and the audience is our client ID. Now let's extract the payload from this ticket by calling ticket.getPayload. In case of success, we are going to attach a user object into our request, and we are going to include in this object, for example, the ID, name, and the photo URL. These information, we received them from Google after we provide Google with the token or with the signature of the user, and Google will reply with the information of the user if it is valid token, and we need these trusted information to add them after that in our database with the information of the room that this user added this room. We don't receive these information or user fields from client side because it is not trusted environment. We received it from Google directly. After that, we can pass the execution to the next middleware, which is our function create room. And in case of error, we are going to send a response to the user with a status 401 that it is unauthorized request. Now let's go and add this middleware in our router. This auth will intercept the request, and in case there is invalid token, it will reply automatically to the user with unauthorized, or if it is valid, it will pass the execution to our create room and added the user object to the request. Now let's check again. If we click on our profile, we receive that something is wrong with your authorization, that is unauthorized request. It is working now because we modified or compromised our token by adding the character T. Now if we remove that character, if you can see here, you can see that the response from Google was invalid token signature. And if we test again, we got a successful response. That means our token is valid. Now let's add another layer in client side to test the token if it is not expired. We are going to use a hook. Let's call it use check token. This hook will test if the token is expired. If it is expired, it will automatically log the user out. So let's build this hook. Let's import our current user from the state and the dispatcher to log the user out if the token has expired. We are going to use effect. If there is a logged in user, we'll import the GW decode. And we will decode the current user token. And we will check the expiry date of the token and compare it to the current time. If it has expired, we will dispatch update user and pass null to log the user out of our system. We are going to add this hook in all the components that the authenticated user can access these components. So in our case now, we can add it to the drop menu of the user and the icons of the user. And in the next video, we are going to add it to the page of adding room. If you wanted to test this hook, you can wait after you logged in with a user account for maybe 1 hour and 10 minutes approximately. Then you can refresh the page and you can see that this hook will log you out. And let's go and add another extra check. If the response was according to unauthorized access, we will log this user out. If response.status is 401, we will dispatch the action update user and pass null as payload. We can check this by modifying our token. Let's add a character here. That means our token is compromised. It's not valid anymore. And let's send the request again. Here we received the message and the system logged us out. Let's clear these messages down. Now let's work on adding our user to the local storage, so the user can stay logged in even if he left our web application. So let's write to the local storage. And in our context provider, in the first render, we will read these information from the local storage. We will try to read from local storage by the key current user. And we will wrap it with json.parse to transfer the string into an object. And we will check if the current user we read from our local storage is not null. We will update the state with the current user from our local storage. Let's save and check. Let's try to log in. Let's use one of these accounts. And let's refresh the page. The user stayed logged in. It is working. If we go to the local storage, we can see our current user information here. If you close directly this prompt from this X, the Google will suspend this prompt for maybe 2 hours, I think. Now we have an error here. Let's check why the message not appearing. This is the function responsible for that suspension. We throw this error and we catch the error down. Okay, it is the message. I misspelled the message. Let's fix it and check again. Now here's our message. Because the prompt is not working, this is the function responsible for this notification. It is triggered when the prompt can't be displayed. But if you go to the cookies, you can find the cookie responsible for that. This is one, that means it is active, and this is the time you have to wait before you can test again, or you can use this prompt again. If we make it 0 as default and enter and check again, we are back to business. Let's try to log in. Everything is working. In our next video, we are going to work on our custom authentication system, how to register user and how to log in that user and provide that user with our own token and test and verify that token. So see you guys in the next video.